Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So, if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story number 1. We're checking out my grandfather's truck. I'm a 21-year-old guy living in a small town with moderate crime, nothing outrageous, but just enough to keep your senses sharp. It was late one evening when I walked out to my car, planning to head over to my girlfriend's house for a relaxed night. As I approached the vehicle, a man in the distance called out, asking me for a cigarette. I declined, raising my voice just enough to carry the message across the parking lot, and kept walking at a quicker pace. What I didn't expect was for him to start running toward me, closing the distance faster than I was comfortable with. He complimented my car and asked how old I was. I told him I was 21, trying not to appear bothered, and got into my car, hoping that would be the end of it. But he kept talking. He asked if I could drive him to the corner store for cigarettes, and although I said no, I handed him $3, 0 cents, hoping it would be enough to send him on his way. It wasn't. Instead, the man began asking more personal questions, whether I did drugs, if I had social media, if I was trying to make friends. I kept my answers brief, even awkward. I could tell he was trying to latch onto me for something, but I didn't know what. He gave me his name and asked for mine, then for my phone number. I hesitated. In that split second of doubt, I made a mistake. I gave it to him. Maybe he was just lonely, maybe he was trying to make a friend, or maybe something else entirely, but my instincts were not settled. Later that night, he texted me. I didn't respond. Then, a different number texted me again. Still him. I ignored it. 5 days passed and I thought I'd managed to avoid the situation, but then, as I returned home one evening, I saw him again. He spotted me instantly and ran up, asking why I hadn't replied to his messages. I stumbled through excuses, saying maybe the messages didn't go through or there was some glitch. He talked about needing a job, wanting friends, and trying to change his life. Maybe that's true, but there was something in his energy that didn't sit right. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, the way he lingered, the persistence in his voice, the too familiar tone for someone I had barely met. I told him I was busy. I didn't say much about how I spent my days, but he could probably see my car in the lot most afternoons. He kept pushing to hang out, and I kept sidestepping his invitations. It wasn't threatening exactly, but something about his intensity made me deeply uncomfortable. The very next day, he FaceTimed me 6 times, from both numbers. I didn't answer once. Then he texted me again. More calls. Again, I ignored everything. I was trying to make it clear without confrontation that I didn't want to build a relationship with this man. Still, I knew the risk. He lived nearby. Avoiding him forever would be difficult. I stayed alert whenever I stepped outside, checking my surroundings before walking to my car. I was cautious, but not afraid yet. I hoped that if I maintained my distance, things would settle down on their own. And for a while, it seemed like they did. I stopped seeing him. My phone went silent. But just as I was beginning to relax, the universe threw something else my way. About 4 days later, a different kind of encounter unfolded. One even stranger than the last. I was pulling into the driveway late in the evening when 2 unfamiliar men stepped out of their car and started gesturing toward me. They didn't say much at first, just waved their arms, trying to get my attention. I kept driving, not slowing down. That's when I heard them yell out, "Hey!" and they actually started running after my car. I floored it, speeding away into the night. My mind was racing. Was this random? Connected? I didn't know, but I knew I needed protection. The next day, I bought pepper spray. I also noted the license plate number of the vehicle and reported it to the leasing office just in case. There was no harm in being too careful. Life in a small town means things like this don't go unnoticed. Everyone knows everyone else, or at least they think they do. Just last weekend I was reminded of that when a young woman I'd never seen before walked up to my porch. She was friendly, smiling, and said she had a friend who wanted to get to know me. She asked if I was single. I told her I was. When she asked for my number, I hesitated again, but I've always been open to meeting new people, so I gave it to her. Another mistake. Within minutes, a man I vaguely remembered from years ago texted me, introducing himself, saying he thought I was attractive and wanted to talk in person. I agreed, naively thinking he'd come alone. He didn't. He showed up with 4 other people and I knew instantly that something was off. They all looked strung out, agitated and unstable. The man, his name was Harry, was rail thin, toothless and clearly homeless. I remembered his name from somewhere, but I'd never truly met him before. It was obvious he thought we were going to start some sort of relationship, that I'd welcome him into my home. I wasn't interested, not even close. I made up an excuse about needing to be somewhere and sent them away. 4 days later, my doorbell camera captured Harry sitting on my porch steps at 3:47 a.m, staring into the distance. At one point, he even looked directly into the camera, twice. It made my stomach turn. I started checking the footage regularly after that. One morning, around 5:30 a.m, I stepped outside for a cigarette. I don't smoke inside, and lately I'd been checking the camera before opening the door, just to be safe. That morning, the camera didn't show anyone, so I figured it was clear. I stepped out, groggy, half awake, half cast down at the pavement. Then I heard a voice. I looked up, and there he was, Harry, standing less than 3 feet away from me. I practically leapt out of my skin. I screamed at him, "You just scared the hell out of me." He laughed, but when he saw how angry I was, his smile faded. He claimed his phone had died and asked if I'd been trying to reach him. I reminded him of the text I'd sent him when he sat on my porch in the middle of the night. He'd never responded. He tried to flirt with me again, leaning in with some ridiculous line, "Good morning, sunshine." I wanted to scream. I told him I wasn't a morning person, that he needed to leave immediately. As he started walking away, slowly, deliberately, he kept glancing back, like he expected me to change my mind and call him back. I didn't. I watched the footage again later. It was all there, the way he appeared from nowhere. The look in his eyes, the long stare down at the camera after that. Things escalated further. For 2 days straight, Harry sat on a bench in front of the local bowling alley, directly aligned with my front door, watching my every move. He didn't care if it was raining or not, he just sat there. I haven't seen him since, and I hope he's gone for good. But something in my gut tells me this isn't over. The police are aware. My son works for the sheriff's department and he made sure they knew everything. And yet, the tension hasn't lifted. Every time I open my front door, I feel like someone's watching. I've dealt with paranormal things in my life. I'm actually a part-time investigator of those kinds of things, but nothing compares to this. I've always said that it's not the dead you should fear, it's the living. And I've never believed that more than I do now. Story number 2. It was around 1 a.m. on a quiet winding road, surrounded by empty fields and silence, the kind that presses on your ears and makes every little sound feel like an intrusion. My wife was asleep in the passenger seat, her breathing slow and steady, while our daughters were in the back watching a movie, earbuds in and eyes fixed on the small screen. Even our toddler, wedged between them with a few soft toys in hand, seemed completely content, lost in his own little world. We were on our way to a friend's house in the countryside, a trip we had made a few times before, though never this late. The GPS had taken us on a detour off the highway, leading us through a deserted stretch of road that made me uneasy the second we turned onto it. The gravel cracked beneath the tires, and the only light came from our headlights, cutting through the darkness ahead. The road had seen better days. Potholes scattered like forgotten landmines, dips and ruts that sent gentle tremors through the car. I was focused, careful to steer between them, when something unusual appeared ahead. Sitting right in the middle of our lane was a piece of luggage. Just beyond it, a car sat parked on the opposite side of the road, facing us, its lights off, windows dark. It looked abandoned, almost forgotten. And yet its placement, so deliberate, so quiet, made the hairs on my arm stand up. My first instinct was to stop and move the luggage out of the way, but just as my fingers curled around the door handle, my wife stirred beside me and grabbed my arm. Her eyes were wide, and she gestured toward the field on our right. There, almost hidden by the tall grass and night's cloak, was a figure. A man stood among the stalks, occasionally glancing at his phone, the screen casting a faint blue light across his face. My heart sank. Something about the scene didn't sit right. There was a tension in the air, a wrongness that whispered danger. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into reverse and prepared to turn around. That's when two more figures emerged from the field. Stepping directly in front of the car, they blocked the road, arms out, bodies angled toward us. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding, hands gripping the wheel so tightly it hurt. Behind us, the parked car and the luggage remained. We were boxed in, surrounded. There was no time to analyze, no logic to consult. Pure instinct took over. I shifted into drive and floored it, heading straight for the luggage. The car lurched forward and crushed it beneath the tires. There was nothing solid inside, no damage to the vehicle, only a muffled crunch as it flattened beneath us. We didn't stop. I kept driving, adrenaline surging, eyes darting to the mirrors in case we were being followed, but there was nothing behind us, just darkness. We arrived at my friend's house an hour later, and the tension only began to leave my body as we stepped inside and locked the door behind us. Everyone acted like it was just another road trip, but I couldn't shake it. Not then, not even now. There was the precision of it that haunted me. The setup, the figures, the silence. If my wife hadn't spotted that man in the field, I might have gotten out of the car. I might have been alone out there, moving that luggage while they crept closer behind me. I think about that a lot. How one small decision can separate safety from danger, normal from nightmare. The next morning I checked the news. Nothing reported, no alerts, no missing persons. Nothing to explain what we saw. But I know what happened. I know what we narrowly escaped. And it's not something I can easily forget. Not something that fades with time. The luggage wasn't an accident. That car wasn't broken down. They were waiting for anyone, really. Anyone willing to play the Good Samaritan. And that's what makes it all the more chilling. We weren't targeted. We were random. Just a family on the road, at the wrong place, at the wrong time. I often wonder what might have happened if I'd stopped, if I'd left the door open, if the others had surrounded me before I even noticed. There are too many possibilities, and none of them feel safe. Even now, whenever I drive at night, I see things in the shadows that probably aren't there. But I still check, every time. My wife and I talked about it the next day, quietly, so the kids wouldn't hear. She admitted she had a bad feeling the second we left the highway. She didn't say anything at first, not wanting to sound paranoid. I told her she saved my life by stopping me. We laughed it off, but only for a moment. It's hard to laugh at something like that for long. My daughters never knew anything happened. They were too deep in their movie to notice. My toddler slept through it all. Maybe that's for the best. The world has enough shadows in it without giving children more to fear. Sometimes I think back to those figures, how calm they looked, how confidently they stepped onto the road, like it wasn't the first time they had done this, like it wouldn't be the last. Their faces were mostly hidden, but the body language, the timing, it was all so rehearsed. This wasn't a mugging or a prank. This was something organized, something practiced. And that's the part that gives me chills even now. All these months later, I've driven that same road in the daylight, trying to make sense of what I saw. But in the sunlight, it's just another stretch of dirt and grass, innocuous and dull, as if the memory is lying to me. But I know it's not. If you ever find yourself driving through the countryside and you see luggage in the road, think twice. If there's a car parked quietly nearby facing you in silence, take a breath before you act. And if you notice someone standing in the fields, glancing down at a glowing screen, turn around. Don't hesitate. Don't rationalize. Don't wait for a sign, because sometimes the scariest things in life don't come with warning sirens or flashing lights. Sometimes they come dressed as coincidences, sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for someone to step just a little too close. I know that now, and I'll never forget it. Story number 3. Back in my college days, I had a habit of car camping alone in the Ozarks, a rugged and remote expanse of nature that offered quiet like nowhere else. I owned an old but reliable pickup truck, and I'd throw a mattress in the back, pack up some food, and disappear into the wild for the night. I wasn't looking for adventure, really, just solitude, some space to think, and the kind of silence that resets your mind. On this particular trip, I had driven further than usual into an area I'd never stayed in before. It was a public-use forest clearing, nothing formal, just an open patch surrounded by trees with a fire ring that had seen years of use. I ate my dinner, a simple sandwich and a chocolate bar for dessert, then climbed into the back of the truck and settled under my blanket. The night was still and quiet, except for the occasional chirp of insects and rustling leaves. I felt safe, at peace. That wouldn't last. About 45 minutes after turning off the small LED lantern I used for reading, I started to hear the faint crunch of leaves off in the distance. It was a light, slow movement, too deliberate to be the wind. Maybe a deer, I thought. Maybe even a coyote. It was too far off to worry about, but as I lay there, trying to drift into sleep, the noises grew louder, closer, more deliberate. Step by step, moving through the underbrush toward my camp, I held my breath and listened. Still, I told myself, it could be any animal. This was the wilderness after all. I wasn't new to it. And yet, the longer I listened, the less I believed it was just some passing creature. I sat up slightly and peered out through the side of the truck canopy. There was nothing there, only shadows and trees and the faint orange glow from the dying campfire. I lay back down, heart a little faster now, but still determined to sleep. The leaves stopped crunching for a while and silence returned. I convinced myself it was over. But then, at some point during the night, hours later, long enough that I must have fallen into a light sleep, I heard it again. But this time, it was different. The steps were heavy, measured. Not the erratic movement of wildlife, but the firm pace of someone walking. I could hear them clearly, coming between me and the campfire. That's when I knew. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there. My breath caught in my throat, and I didn't dare move. My heart pounded in my ears as I listened to the soft steps on the pine needles. They stopped right next to the truck. I couldn't see anything now. Just darkness, and the occasional flicker of dying embers beyond the truck bed. Then I heard a voice. Deep, calm, so close I could almost feel it in my spine. It asked me one question: do you believe in God? That voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. It didn't sound panicked or angry. It sounded wrong in some deeper way, like it didn't belong to the night at all. I let out a scream without meaning to. I turned on the LED light, thrashed out of my blanket and grabbed the can of bear spray. My body was in full panic mode, but when I looked outside there was nothing there. No footprints, no figure, nothing moving, just trees swaying softly under the weight of their own stillness. Whoever had been there was gone. I sat in silence, shaking, staring out into the woods, waiting to see if they'd come back, but the footsteps didn't return. The voice didn't speak again. Eventually I convinced myself I had hallucinated it all, that maybe the sugar from the dessert had messed with my sleep, that maybe I dreamed it. Is the only thing that made sense because the alternative was too terrifying. Still, the memory stayed with me long after the night ended. I drove out of the forest as soon as the first light of morning began to brighten the trees. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't clean up camp. I just drove. The sound of those footsteps, that voice, "Do you believe in God?" It replayed in my mind over and over. I kept telling myself it was a dream, that it wasn't real. But dreams don't leave you shaken for weeks. Dreams don't keep you from sleeping in your truck again. I haven't returned to the Ozarks since. The forest feels different to me now. Less like a peaceful refuge, and more like a place where the veil is thinner than we think. That voice wasn't normal. I've heard deep voices before, I've heard whispers in the woods, but this one, it cut through the night like it didn't belong there. Like it didn't even need to speak aloud to be heard. Some nights, even now, I lie in bed and remember it, and the memory creeps into my bones. I've tried explaining it to friends, even joked about it once or twice, but when I really try to describe what I felt that night, the words fail me. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, something primal, like I wasn't just in danger, like I was being judged. The thing that disturbs me most is how the voice seemed to know what to say. That question, it was so specific, so intimate. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't random, it was almost philosophical, like it was probing something inside me I hadn't even considered. It makes me wonder if whoever or whatever was out there had been watching me for a while, listening, waiting. I've replayed the night 1,000 times in my head, looking for clues, wondering if I'd missed something, but all I have is that voice, and the feeling that I was inches away from something I'll never understand. I've read stories online about other campers who've had strange experiences in the woods. Voices, figures, shadows that don't behave like shadows. Maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe there's something in places like the Ozarks that the rest of us aren't supposed to see. Some veil, some boundary between what we know and what's out there in the dark. And maybe, just maybe it slips sometimes. Maybe it opens for people like me who seek solitude in places where silence runs too deep. Maybe I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe I was exactly where it wanted me. Whatever happened that night, it changed how I see the world. Not in a dramatic, life-altering way, but in subtle things. The way I avoid looking into the woods for too long. The way I hesitate before going outside at night. The way I feel when I hear footsteps on gravel when I know I'm alone. Some part of me knows I'll never go car camping again. Not alone. Not like that. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or demons or any of that, but I believe in the voice. I believe it was real. And I believe that asking the wrong question or being asked the right one in the wrong place can open something you won't know how to close. Story number 4. Working the night shift at a 24-hour donut shop wasn't something I had planned for. But life has a funny way of tossing surprises your way when you're just trying to make rent. I was a college student back then, trying to balance tuition, textbooks, and cheap meals. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep the lights on. Everyone always asked why we were open so late, and to be honest, I wondered the same. I mean, how many people really need a jelly donut at 3:00 a.m? But people came. Truckers, insomniacs, college kids, pulling all-nighters. And apparently something else came too. I was new, still learning the ropes, when one of my friends, who had referred me to the place, gave me a weird grin and said, "Good luck, man. Watch out for the flying boxes." I thought he was joking, just giving me a hard time, but he wasn't. The very first night I was on the register being trained on the point of sale system, I felt it. Something cold tapped me just under my shoulder blade, like a finger, but no one was behind me. I turned around instinctively, expecting to see a co-worker or maybe a confused customer who had gotten too close, but there was no one there. That area was blocked off by glass during the pandemic, completely inaccessible. I froze, then looked at my trainer. He gave me a casual nod like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Yeah?" he said. "Welcome to the job." He said it with a smile like it was a rite of passage. That night things got worse. Boxes of donuts flew from the shelves. Lights flickered on and off. My phone battery dropped from 70% to 5% in 5 minutes, like the energy in the room was being drained. Over the next few weeks, the activity became more frequent. Strange noises echoed from the back storage room, even when no one was there. I once walked in to find the mop bucket spinning slowly in place, as if someone had just used it. even though the floor was bone dry. One night, the smell of burning sugar wafted through the shop, but nothing had been left on. My co-workers had their own stories too. Stories of hearing whispers in the freezer, of seeing someone walk past the doorway only to find no one there. But the scariest thing that ever happened didn't involve sound or scent. It involved sight. Real, clear, undeniable sight. It was just past 3:00 a.m. and I had gone to check the bathrooms, a routine task meant to break up the boredom. My manager joined me because we'd both heard something slam earlier in that area. We entered the men's restroom, chatting lightly as we cleaned the sink. Then the door opened, slowly but with purpose. We turned. A man walked in, tall and imposing with a long beard and sunken eyes. He smelled horrible, like rot and sour meat. It was so overwhelming we instinctively stepped back. He asked, almost politely, if the bathroom was available. We nodded and I grabbed my things and stepped out, wanting to give him privacy. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Silence. My manager and I exchanged glances, I'm sure. He knocked gently on the stall door, no answer. He nudged it open. The stall was empty. There was no sign of the man. And there's only one exit, the one we were standing in front of the entire time. He hadn't passed us, he hadn't left, he had just vanished. That was the moment I stopped trying to rationalize things. Until then, I brushed off the cold spots and flying boxes as odd but explainable. Maybe air vents, maybe a draft, maybe faulty wiring, but a full-grown man doesn't just disappear in a locked restroom. And he wasn't the only one. Over the months, we began to keep mental tallies of events. A box would fly off a shelf, 1 point. Doors opening on their own, full 2 points. We laughed about it, nervously, but the fear never left. New hires would be skeptical at first, but within a week or two, they'd experience something, and then they'd get that same look in their eyes. That mix of fear and wonder. It didn't matter who you were, something wanted to make itself known to everyone who stepped behind that counter. I started to read about other haunted places, other haunted businesses, and it surprised me how many had similar stories. Objects moving, voices calling out, temperature drops. But most of those stories had some tragic backstory, a fire, a death, something to tie the spirit to the place. We had nothing like that. No documented incidents, no known history. It was just a donut shop on a street corner that happened to be open late, where something decided to live. Maybe not live, just linger. We joked that maybe the ghost had been a former employee who couldn't give up the overtime pay, but deep down, we all knew it was something older. There's something stranger. There were quieter nights, of course. Some shifts would pass with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the slow tick of the wall clock. And on those nights, I almost missed the activity. It had become a weird comfort, like knowing someone was always there, even if they didn't belong. But then something would happen again. A tap on the shoulder, a voice saying your name when no one else was around, a door opening just wide enough to make you look up. It kept you on edge. It kept you alert. But more than that, it kept you curious. What did it want? Was it playing with us or warning us? I began to notice patterns. The activity spiked around 2:00 to 3:00 a.m. as if the place had its own haunted rush hour. It would settle down again by dawn, fading with the first light. There was always a stillness that came with the morning sun, as if whatever stirred in the night retreated to some hidden place until the darkness returned. I started recording some of the events on my phone, not for proof, I knew no one would believe me, but for myself. To remind me that I wasn't imagining it. I even brought in a digital recorder one night and left it running in the back room. The playback was chilling. Faint whispers, footsteps, a soft guttural hum that faded in and out like someone breathing. Now, when I look back, I think the strangest part wasn't the paranormal stuff, it was how normal it became. We all adjusted. We all carried on. We sold donuts, we brewed coffee, We swept floors, cleaned sinks, laughed at memes and scheduled breaks. And in between all that, we'd brace ourselves for the next flicker, the next voice, the next whisper in the dark. Because in that donut shop, the paranormal wasn't an interruption, it was just part of the shift, part of the atmosphere, like the sugar glaze in the air and the hum of the cooler. And while I've moved on from that job, I'll never forget the night I learned that not all hauntings are tragic or angry or malicious. Some are just there, present, persistent. And if you work the night shift long enough, they might just say hello. Story number 5. When I was 12 years old, my family moved into a new home nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac at the edge of a small town. The house wasn't new, but it had charm. Wooden floors that creaked softly, tall windows that let in golden afternoon light, and a sprawling backyard that ended at a dense tree line. I was excited. A new room, new adventures, and best of all, the promise of exploration in the woods behind our house. My parents warned me not to go too far, especially alone, but I was 12 and curious. The first few weeks passed without anything strange. I'd spend afternoons climbing the trees, building makeshift forts, and imagining I was an explorer. But then, something began to change. Slowly at first, subtle enough that it might have gone unnoticed. A missing sock from the laundry, a toy slightly moved from where I'd left it, strange creaking noises in the night that didn't quite match the old wood of the house. My parents brushed off my questions. Old houses creak, they said. You probably dropped that toy outside. I wanted to believe them. But something about the house had started to feel off, like it was watching. It wasn't just at night either. During the day, I'd be sitting in my room doing homework and catch movement out of the corner of my eye, just beyond the doorway. Always gone when I looked directly. I started keeping my door shut, but even that didn't help. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like soft footsteps on the carpeted hallway outside, stopping just short of my room. I told myself it was my dad walking to the bathroom, or my mum going to grab the laundry. But when I'd peek out, the hall would be empty. No doors closing. No movement. Just stillness. The first time I saw her, it was late on a Friday night. I'd woken up thirsty and was tiptoeing down the hallway toward the kitchen. The moonlight poured in through the living room windows, painting silver patterns on the floor. That's when I saw her, standing at the edge of the hallway, just past the kitchen archway. A girl, about my age, wearing a pale blue dress. Her hair was dark and wet, clinging to her face. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me with eyes that looked too wide, too knowing. I froze, paralyzed with a fear I couldn't explain. And then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone. I don't remember running back to my room, but I woke up the next morning under my covers, heart still pounding. I tried to tell my parents. They smiled, nodding, saying maybe I had a bad dream. But I knew better. The sightings became more frequent after that. Always at night, always at the edges of the house, as if she didn't want to step into the center. Sometimes I'd wake up and find my door ajar when I was sure I'd closed it. Other times, I'd hear faint sobbing echoing from the basement, where we kept old boxes and tools. Once, I mustered the courage to go down there, flashlight in hand. I crept down the steps slowly, each one groaning beneath my weight. The air was thick and cold. I called out, "Hello?" My voice cracked slightly. Silence answered me, until I reached the last step. That's when I heard a giggle, soft, childlike, not angry, not threatening, but chilling in its quiet certainty. I backed away and ran up the stairs 2 at a time, not looking back. It wasn't just me anymore. One night my mother mentioned hearing footsteps while she was alone doing dishes. She thought it was me or my sister running through the hall. I told her I'd been outside with friends at the time. Her expression changed slightly. She didn't say anything else. That week she started keeping the hallway light on all night. My dad never acknowledged anything outright, but I noticed him checking the locks twice, sometimes 3 times, before bed. Once, he even sprinkled salt at the entrance to the basement. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. The girl in blue never spoke. She never came closer. But her presence grew heavier, like a fog that slowly thickened over time. One evening, while cleaning out the attic, my sister found an old box tucked behind some insulation. Inside were faded photographs, handwritten letters, and a small porcelain doll in a blue dress. My stomach dropped. The girl in the photos was unmistakable. The same face, the same wet hair, the same eyes. The letters were addressed to Marie, written by a woman pleading with her to come home. Each one grew more frantic, more desperate, until they stopped abruptly. We brought the box downstairs and showed it to our parents. My mother went pale. My father took the box and stored it in the garage, locking it in an old cabinet. That night, the house felt colder than usual. The creaks were louder. The lights flickered twice and then went out for a moment, before humming back to life. After that, things escalated. Doors slammed in the middle of the night. Pictures fell off walls. Once, the living room television turned on by itself and played static at full volume until my father unplugged it. My sister began sleepwalking, something she'd never done before. We'd find her standing at the back door, staring into the yard. Once, she even opened the door and walked into the grass, barefoot. When we asked her about it in the morning, she had no memory. We knew we had to do something. A local historian confirmed what we feared. A girl named Maria had lived on the property in the 1940s. She drowned in a nearby creek at age 11. Her body had been found near the trees behind our yard. No one ever discovered why she had gone out alone that day. We held a quiet ceremony near the creek, left flowers, and read a prayer aloud. My mum whispered apologies into the air, and I left the doll from the attic beneath a tree by the water. After that night, things calmed. The house grew quieter. The cold spots faded, and though I never saw the girl in blue again, I sometimes still feel her, in the hush of early morning, in the brief flicker of the hallway light, in the way the house settles just before sleep. Not angry, not lost, just there, a memory stitched into the wood and walls of the home we all tried to understand. Sometimes, when I dream, I see her standing beneath the tree where we left the doll. She's not sad anymore, just still, watching, waiting for someone to remember she was ever there. Story number 6. When I was 17, my uncle offered me a summer job taking care of his lake house. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small cabin nestled in the hills of Maine, tucked away beside a lake that reflected the sky so perfectly you could lose yourself in it. He said he and his wife were going on an extended vacation across the country, and they needed someone to keep an eye on the place, feed the stray cat that hung around the porch, and make sure the pipes didn't freeze at night. I accepted immediately. The thought of being alone in a peaceful cabin by the water was more appealing than any summer class or retail job. When I arrived, the house smelled of pine and old wood, and the lake shimmered through the trees like a silver secret. Everything felt right. For the first few nights, I sat on the porch, watched the sunset, read until the stars came out, and fell asleep to the chirp of crickets and the rustling of wind through the leaves. Then, the silence began to change. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was a slow shift, an unfamiliar pressure that would settle in the air after nightfall, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. It started on the 5th night. I was brushing my teeth in the small bathroom near the back of the cabin when I noticed that the reflection in the mirror didn't quite match my movements. It was a subtle delay, barely perceptible, but enough to make my heart stutter. I shook my head, laughed nervously, and blamed the flickering light overhead. But the feeling didn't leave. It hung with me even as I climbed into bed, wrapped in warm blankets, listening to the usual sounds of nature outside. Only that night, the crickets had stopped. The forest had gone quiet. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep plays tricks on your mind, especially when you're alone in unfamiliar places. I went about my routine, made coffee, fed the stray cat, even took a canoe out onto the lake. The water was still and dark, the way glass looks before it breaks. I paddled out to the center and let the boat drift while I lay on my back staring at the sky. That peace returned for a while, and I felt silly for worrying. But that night, the silence returned again. It came after midnight as I was reading a novel with a flashlight by the porch. The flashlight began to dim, though the batteries were fresh. I switched it off, intending to head inside, when I heard something in the woods. Not a branch snapping, not an animal scurrying. It was breathing. Slow, deep, deliberate breathing, just beyond the line of trees. I froze. The cat hissed and darted under the porch. My heart pounded as I stood up slowly, peering into the dark. I couldn't see anything, but the breathing continued. It wasn't moving closer, just waiting. I stepped back, opened the screen door behind me and slipped inside, locking it softly. The sound stopped. I stood there for a while, staring out into the trees, but nothing moved. I went to bed with the lights on, my nerves frayed like unraveling string. Around 3 a.m, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, steady, deliberate. Not like boots, not like bare feet, more like something dragging across the wooden boards. I held my breath, too afraid to move, praying that it was just a dream, but the footsteps didn't fade. They circled the cabin once. The next morning, I inspected the porch. No footprints, no scuffs, not even a stray leaf out of place. The cat was gone. I called for her, checked the nearby woods, rattled the food can, but she didn't return. That day I decided to drive into town and talk to the neighbors, though there weren't many. Most homes in the area were seasonal rentals, empty during the week. I found an older woman tending to a garden at the end of the road. When I asked if she'd ever seen or heard anything strange near the lake, she looked at me for a long time before answering. "That cabin's been there a long time," she said softly. "You're not the first to ask that question." I pressed her for more, but she just shook her head. "Don't stay out too late," she said, turning back to her flowers. Her voice had a tremble I didn't know how to interpret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on and the doors locked, and I kept the curtains drawn. At exactly 2:12 a.m, I heard it again. Not footsteps this time, but scratching. From the back wall. Gentle at first, then harder. It wasn't frantic, just persistent. Like someone or something was tracing a pattern across the wood with their fingers. I grabbed my phone and started recording the sound, but the moment I hit record, it stopped. I listened for a while longer. Nothing. Then I played the recording. What I heard chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just scratching. There was a voice behind it, whispering words I couldn't understand, a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't loud, it was almost buried beneath the static, but it was there. I deleted the file. Something about keeping it felt wrong, like it was holding on to something I wasn't meant to carry. The following morning, I found the cat. She was lying under the canoe, motionless, eyes wide open. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, just a stillness that felt unnatural, like the life had been drained from her instead of taken. I buried her near the tree line with shaking hands, feeling like I had broken a rule I didn't understand. After that, I stopped going outside at night. I stayed inside, played music softly and tried to drown out the silence, but the silence always found its way in. Through the walls, through the windows, through the spaces between thoughts. I started to hear whispers even during the day, just faint enough that I couldn't make out the words. The lake stopped feeling peaceful. It felt watchful, like it was waiting for me to step too close. I left the cabin 2 weeks early. I told my uncle I wasn't feeling well and needed to head back home. He was disappointed but understood. I never told him about the breathing, the footsteps, the whispers. I never told anyone. Some nights, even now, I still dream about that cabin, about the porch that creaked without weight, about the woods that held their breath, about a presence that never showed itself but always made itself known. I don't know what lives there. I don't know if it followed me or if it's still waiting for someone new to watch. All I know is this: when the forest goes quiet, truly quiet, it's not peace you're hearing. It's warning. Listen closely. Story number 7. When I was in high school, I worked part-time at a local movie theatre, the kind with sticky floors, flickering lights and that faint lingering smell of popcorn and soda syrup soaked into the carpet. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. Free movies, quiet late-night shifts, and the strange comfort of being surrounded by stories. The theatre itself was old, built in the early 60s, with architecture that had barely changed since. I used to joke that the ghosts of old films probably haunted the place, but eventually the jokes stopped. There was something about Theatre 3. It looked like the others: red velvet seats, a dull screen, low ceiling, but it always felt colder, even during matinees. And whenever I worked the closing shift, I found excuses not to clean it alone. Something about the air in that room felt thick, like it hadn't moved in years, like it was watching. It started small, a trash bin that would tip over even though no one was near it, a whisper of movement in the corner of your eye. Once, while sweeping under the last row, I found a toy, an old metal race car, sitting neatly on the seat. We didn't sell toys, and no one had reported a lost one. I shrugged it off, placed it in the lost and found, and forgot about it. But 2 nights later, it was back on the same seat, in the exact same position. I asked my co-workers if they were messing with me, and they all swore they hadn't touched it. Some of them laughed. One of them didn't. His name was Jamie. He had been working there longer than the rest of us. Quiet guy. He waited until everyone else left before pulling me aside. "Don't touch that car again," he said. "Just leave it where it is. Trust me." I didn't know how to respond. Jamie didn't offer an explanation, and I didn't push for one. That weekend, I worked a double shift, noon to midnight, and around 11:45 p.m, Theatre 3 was empty, the last show having ended an hour earlier. I stepped inside with my broom, whistling softly, trying to keep the mood light. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the aisle lights. As I swept between the rows, I heard something behind me, a soft clink. I turned. The toy car was on the seat again, but this time it wasn't sitting neatly. It was upside down, wheels spinning slowly as if it had just been dropped. I stared at it, frozen. Then I heard it. Laughter. Not loud, not adult. A child's giggle, floating down from the projection booth above. I dropped the broom and left, fast. I didn't stop to clock out. I didn't check the lost and found. I drove straight home and didn't sleep. The next morning, Jamie called me. He didn't ask what happened. He just said, "It showed itself to you, didn't it?" I asked him what he meant, and finally he told me the story. Years ago, back when the theatre was newer, a little boy had gone missing during a crowded screening in Theatre 3. No one noticed until after the movie ended. He was never found. Security footage, grainy and old, showed him sitting alone in the last row, and then, in the next frame, he was gone. Just like that. No one saw him leave. No exit doors opened. No one remembered seeing him during the movie. Only the car was left behind on the seat. His favorite toy. Over time, strange things started happening in that theatre. Staff saw figures moving in the dark. Kids would cry when brought into the room, even during animated films. One teenager said he felt someone tug on his sleeve when no one was behind him. The theatre tried to remodel the room once, replacing the seats and upgrading the speakers, but every time they made changes, The disturbances increased, projectors would malfunction, sound would cut out during key scenes, the toy car would return, always on that same seat in the back row. Eventually they stopped trying. They left the room as it was. Jamie said he learned to ignore it. He's not angry, he told me. He's just here. And he doesn't like change. After that conversation, I avoided Theatre 3. I swapped shifts when I could. If I had to clean it, I made sure someone was with me. But the atmosphere never changed. I always felt eyes on me in that room, even if I couldn't see anyone. I tried to be respectful. I stopped picking up the car. I never turned my back to the screen while inside. It became routine. We all had our superstitions. The managers pretended not to notice. But even they stopped scheduling movie premieres in that theatre. It became a quiet space, almost a shrine. The people who didn't know the story often complained that the room felt cold or sad. They said the audio was off or the picture looked dull. But nothing was wrong. At least, nothing technical. On my last week before heading to college, I worked a final closing shift. I wanted to say goodbye to the team, maybe take one last free movie. I ended up watching a drama in Theatre 2 and stayed after to help sweep the halls. Around 12:30 IMM, I passed by Theatre 3 and saw the door cracked open. I hadn't remembered it being scheduled that night. Curious, I peeked in. It was dark, completely empty, but as I turned to walk away, I heard it again, that quiet giggle. I looked back. The toy car was sitting in the aisle, right in the doorway. No one else was there, just me and him. I bent down slowly, picked it up and whispered, "Goodbye." Then I set it back on the seat in the back row and left without turning around. Sometimes, when I visit home, I drive past that theatre. It's still open, still hanging on despite the streaming era. Theatre 3 still shows movies, though only during the day now. I've heard they keep the lights on low even during the films, just in case. Jamie still works there. He never left. When I stop in, we nod to each other, a quiet understanding passing between us. We don't talk about the car, we don't talk about the boy. But we remember, and I think that's all he ever wanted. To be remembered. To have his seat left undisturbed. To let the reels spin on while he watches from the shadows, never leaving, never forgotten. Story number 8. A few years ago, I took a job as a security guard at a massive abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of a dying industrial town. The building had been out of use for nearly 2 decades, but a tech company had recently purchased it with plans to convert it into a modern office complex. Until then, my job was simple: patrol the property, make sure no squatters broke in, and report any vandalism or structural damage. The building was enormous, 6 stories tall with cracked windows, rusted pipes, and corridors that echoed with even the softest step. My shift started at 10 o'clock p.m. and ended at 6 o'clock a.m. I worked alone. At first I thought it would be peaceful, even boring, just a paycheck for walking in circles. But after a few nights I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. There was a room on the 3rd floor, room 312. It looked like all the others. Dusty floors, forgotten filing cabinets, water stains on the ceiling. But from the very first night, I avoided it. Not for any reason I could explain, just a sense, deep in my chest, that something was wrong with that room. Whenever I passed it, I quickened my pace. I'd shine my flashlight inside, pretend I was checking it, then move on. But one night, the door was open. I was sure I'd left it closed during my first pass. I paused at the doorway, flashlight beam trembling slightly. The room was empty, but it didn't feel empty. The air was heavier, the silence thicker. I stepped back, closed the door slowly, and kept walking. My radio crackled faintly in my hand even though no one was on the other end. Later that same shift, as I sat in the ground floor security office reviewing footage from the night's patrol, I noticed something strange. At 2:16 AUME, the camera facing the 3rd floor hallway flickered. then showed a shadow slipping out of room 312 and drifting down the corridor. There were no clear features, just a dark blur that moved like smoke caught in still air. Portureto. I rewound the tape, played it again. Same thing. When I checked the hallway in person, there was nothing there. No sound, no movement. Just the steady hum of fluorescent lights and the faint whir of old ventilation. I considered reporting it, but decided against it. What would I say? That a shadow walked out of a room I didn't like? I told myself the camera glitched. I told myself the mind sees patterns where there are none. But the feeling in my gut said otherwise. The next few nights were worse. I began hearing things. Faint knocks from the walls, voices echoing down stairwells that should have been empty. Once, I swore I heard someone calling my name. It wasn't loud, just a whisper that wrapped around my thoughts and made me question my sanity. I stopped going to the third floor entirely. I made up excuses in my log. Renovation zone, slippery stairs, anything that sounded official. But that didn't stop the noises. Sometimes on the monitors, I'd see doors slowly swing open and shut, not slamming, just easing open, like they were being tested, like something was checking to see who was still inside. One night, I arrived to find the front entrance already unlocked. I knew I'd locked it the night before. The alarm hadn't been tripped, and there were no signs of forced entry. Just an open door and the same suffocating quiet waiting inside. I walked through the building with my flashlight, calling out in case someone had broken in. But the rooms were empty, dust undisturbed, footprints absent. Only when I reached the stairwell leading to the third floor did I notice something new. Handprints, small, dark smudges on the banister like someone had gripped it tightly with dirty fingers. I stood there for a long time, staring, heart pounding in my chest like a drum. Then I turned and walked away. The final night I worked there, the temperature dropped sharply. I wore a thick jacket, but it didn't help. Every breath felt like mist, even inside the building. Around 3 o'clock IIM, the lights on the third floor went out entirely. No surge, no flicker, just darkness. I watched it happen from the security room, helpless. I told myself not to check. I told myself I'd just write it up in the report, but something pulled at me. I need to see it for myself, maybe to face it. I don't know. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the stairs. Each step creaked louder than the last. When I reached the third floor, the air was colder than anywhere else in the building. My breath fogged in front of me. I walked slowly, every instinct screaming for me to turn back. Room 312's door was wide open. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I stepped closer. Inside, everything was as I remembered, except for one thing. A chair, sitting in the center of the room, facing the door. On it was a stack of papers, old employee files, yellowed and brittle. I picked one up. It was a termination notice for a man named Richard L. Howard. The reason? Violation of employee conduct, mental instability, unauthorized entry into restricted areas, dated 1976. I sifted through more papers. Each one was a record of Richard's dissent, disciplinary reports, notes from supervisors, even a psychological evaluation recommending immediate removal. The final page was a handwritten letter. "They live in the walls," it read. "They hear what we think. Room 312 isn't just a room. It's a door." I left the file on the chair and walked out without another word. I never returned to that building. I called the company the next morning and resigned over the phone. I didn't give a reason. I didn't want to. Whatever was in that place, whatever had touched the lives of those before me, wasn't meant to be disturbed. Maybe it had waited years for someone to open the door again. Maybe it chose the quietest part of the building for a reason. I don't know, but I still think about it sometimes. Room 312, chill in the air, the shadow on the tape, the handprints on the stairwell. They were all part of a larger truth I was never meant to understand. I've worked other jobs since, stayed in other buildings, but nothing has ever felt quite as alive as that one. Now, when I drive past old industrial sites or see abandoned buildings in the distance, I wonder what waits inside. I wonder if there are other rooms like 312, sitting quietly in the dark, listening, waiting for someone like me to walk by with a flashlight and too much curiosity. And every time I promise myself the same thing: I won't go in. Some doors don't lead to places, some doors lead to presence, and once you've opened them, even a little, they never truly close.